When we think of digital transformation failures, we often think about SAP and some of the big ERP vendors, but even HCM or human capital vendors like Workday are victim of failures, and I'm going to talk about one of the more recent Workday failures here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients through their digital transformation journeys. And recently, the school district of Sacramento, California, here in the United States where we're based, sued Workday for a failed human capital management implementation. And the reason that this case study is so fascinating is anytime you have a failure, it's fascinating and there's a lot of good lessons learned to take away from those failures, but also because this is a human capital management implementation. And oftentimes when we think of failure, we think of big, massive ERP projects, enterprise-wide systems that affect an entire organization, and you think of those as higher risk things that are more likely to fail. And you don't often hear about the human capital management sorts of failures. And Workday, being a relatively new entrant into the HCM space, hasn't had a track record of failure over the years, or at least not as much failure as some of the bigger ERP vendors. So it'll be interesting to unpack this case study and understand what went wrong with this HCM failure, and more importantly, what can you do differently to ensure that you avoid the same sort of difficulty in your HCM or digital transformation. So first, let's look at what exactly happened with this lawsuit and what exactly was the scope of the project. So to start, the Sacramento School District is a school district that services K through 12 or primary education in the United States. They have about 4,200 employees that are servicing 43,000 students across multiple schools. They initially hired Workday and a system integrator to implement Workday to replace their human capital and payroll processes to replace antiquated technology that they were using in the past. They began the journey in 2013. They originally planned for a 1-year implementation at a price tag just south of $5 million US. And ultimately what ended up happening was the project went off track. The project failed to deliver a functioning system. In fact, as they were about to go live after many delays in the project, the school district found that only 70% of the payroll and human capital and HR related processes would pass the testing process. So they got close to go live, realized they couldn't go live because the system still wasn't working the way they needed to, and they pulled the plug, and they ended up suing Workday and their system integrator for right around $5 million in damages. And in this lawsuit, they're alleging fraud and misrepresentation during the sales cycle, as well as breach of contract and a bunch of other things. But in general, that's the overview of the organization, the Sacramento School District, and Workday itself and the agreement they had with Workday. So what went wrong in this case, and what are some of the lessons we can take away from this? Well, there's a whole plethora of issues and problems that arose during this project, and I'll highlight a few that were outlined in the case against Workday. In no particular order, the first thing that stood out in this case is that there are some allegations that there was a loss of knowledge from the school district's conversations with Workday directly, the software vendor directly, and the system integrator they ultimately ended up hiring to implement the technology. It was assumed or expected from the school district that the information they shared with Workday would be transferred over to the system integrator and that knowledge wouldn't be lost. But what the school district alleges is that that knowledge transfer didn't happen and the system integrator came in cold and didn't have that same background and understanding of the business requirements and needs of the school district. A second allegation is that Workday used boilerplate contracts and didn't tailor the contracts for their specific needs. And one of the big allegations that is also a factor in this case that ties back to the boilerplate contracts allegation is that this was Workday's attempt to break into the primary education market. So the allegation in the case is that Workday didn't have a lot of background implementing its product with other school districts in the primary education space, and they felt as though the contract should have reflected the fact that this was one of their first forays into that space. So that was another allegation, or two sets of allegations there, one related to breach of contract, The other being that they didn't really have the experience in the K through 12 primary education space. And along those same lines, there are allegations that the resources provided by the system integrator were unqualified to implement the technology, particularly in a K through 12 primary education organization, which, according to the district, resulted in time delays as well as budgetary overruns and ultimately the failure of the project. Now, so far, all the allegations in the case that we've summarized here in this video are things that the Sacramento School District is alleging against Workday, but there are certainly things that likely caused failure that were initiated by the school district. For example, one thing that we found in our research is that there was some executive turnover within the school district throughout the implementation, including the superintendent and other leaders within the organization. And anytime you have turnover, especially at the executive level during a transformation, you just escalate your risk because you're more likely to become misaligned, you're more likely to lose the knowledge and the vision for the project, and it just creates inefficiencies along the way. So that's just one example of something that may have contributed to the failure that wasn't necessarily the faults of Workday or the system integrator, but something that came out in our research in this case. So there's a whole host of lessons that we can take away from this HCM implementation failure. First of all is to make sure that you have someone review your contracts. If there's any question about your contract or if you're not comfortable with the contract, make sure you have someone look at not just the terms and conditions of the contract from a legal perspective, but also the economics of the contract to make sure that you know what you're getting yourselves into, what those hidden costs might be, what the faulty assumptions might be, and really someone that can agnostically help you through that process can be very critical and an important step to avoiding some of the challenges that the Sacramento School District faced. Another lesson here is to be sure to document your business requirements and needs. From the research we did, it wasn't clear that the school district actually created an RFP and received an RFP response based on specific requirements. It sounded to me like a lot of the knowledge transfer from the school district to Workday was verbal and more in discussions and perhaps meetings that happened, and that knowledge got lost in the transfer to the system integrator, which may have been mitigated if they would have documented some of those business requirements. It would have been a little bit easier to transfer that knowledge to the system integrator. The other is to make sure you have clear visibility into the project. So if there's unqualified resources on a project being provided by your system integrator or your software vendor, as alleged by the school district in this case, you want to make sure that you have control and transparency into those resources so that you can make a decision to potentially replace those resources or make sure you have the right team in the right place at the right time. And don't leave that completely up to your system integrator. You want to make sure that you're helping manage that as well so that you're not caught off guard or you don't wait until things build up and it's too late to turn back later in the project. And finally, even though you can't necessarily prevent turnover at the executive level or other internal dynamics that may undermine the success of your HCM or digital transformation project, you can ensure that you're taking steps to ensure that the team stays aligned. So as team members come and go, as executives come and go, you make sure that you've got a clear vision and that you're all aligned on where you're headed, and you keep a pulse on that alignment throughout the project. This is especially important if you have the turbulence of executive turnover, and so you want to make sure that you incorporate organizational change activities to ensure that you keep your stakeholders and your executives aligned throughout the project, and that more than anything can ensure that you overcome some of the headwinds that you're bound to face during your digital transformation. So this is just a brief overview of what went wrong in this case and some of the lessons and takeaways that you can learn from and hopefully apply to your digital transformation. I'd love to hear other comments that you might have below. If you have other observations or knowledge about this or other failures, love to hear your feedback below. And I also encourage you to download our 2021 Digital Transformation Report, which covers some of the best practices to be successful in your human capital management or ERP or digital transformation project. And it also includes rankings of some of the best ERP and HCM and CRM systems in the workplace. So I encourage you to download that report as well as some of the other resources I've included links to below. So I hope you found this information useful. Hope you have a great day.